The day my mother handed my sister the keys to the house my grandfather built with his own hands, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "You were never really a part of this family anyway, Marcus." I was 31 years old. I was standing on the front porch in the rain, and I had exactly $43 in my checking account. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had a folder sitting on my laptop back at my apartment with 14 months of receipts, emails, and one document that was going to change every single thing. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before I tell you what was in that folder, I need to tell you about a tire swing. My name is Marcus Allen Webb. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, in a grey craftsman house on Elm Ridge Road, with a covered porch and a tire swing in the backyard that my grandfather, Raymond Webb, hung with his own rope. Raymond built that house in 1971. He poured the concrete foundation himself. He installed every window. He sanded every floor by hand. He built it the way men of his generation built things. Slowly, carefully, like it was meant to last longer than he would. It did. And when Raymond died in the spring of 2021, he left a will that nobody in my family was honest enough to talk about out loud. I need to back up further though, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what I grew up inside of. I was born in 1993, the first child of Daniel and Carol Webb. My father was a mechanic who smelled like motor oil and black coffee, and my mother was a woman who had very specific ideas about what a son was supposed to look like, supposed to act like, supposed to become. I was quiet. I liked to read. I got average grades in middle school, not because I was struggling, but because I spent most of my time in the school library, reading books about architecture and structural engineering that were 2 grade levels above me. My teachers didn't know what to do with a kid like that, so they mostly left me alone. My mother mostly left me alone too, but not in the same way. My sister Amber was born 4 years after me. She came into the world with a smile that could fill a room and a personality that wrapped itself around my mother like a warm blanket. Amber was beautiful and loud and easy, and from the moment she started walking, my mother looked at her the way people look at something rare, something precious, something worth protecting. I don't want to sit here and tell you my childhood was a nightmare, because it wasn't. Not always. My father loved me. He would take me to his garage on Saturday mornings and teach me how engines worked, and I would hold the flashlight steady while he talked. And those are some of the best hours I've ever had. But my father was also a man who chose peace over truth in every single room of that house. He nodded when he should have spoken. He looked away when he should have looked straight ahead. He loved me in private and went quiet in public. And for a long time I didn't understand what that cost me. My mother's world revolved around Amber. Every school event, every volleyball game, every recital. Front row, phone out, recording every second. My things got polite nods. The essay I wrote that won a $50 scholarship in 9th grade got a "That's nice, Marcus" at dinner, and then the conversation moved on to Amber's upcoming tryouts. When Amber was 16, she wanted a car. My mother sold a piece of jewellery my grandmother had left her and bought Amber a used Honda Civic with a blue bow on the antenna. When I was 16, I asked if I could take a summer drafting class at the community college. It cost $80. My mother said we didn't have the money. I looked it up later. The Civic had cost $3,400. I paid for the drafting class myself. I mowed 7 lawns and woke up at 5 in the morning 3 days a week all summer to drive to that community college in my dad's truck before he needed it for work. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to hear what my mother would say about it. That was the year I started keeping records. I was 16 years old and I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about justice or any of the big words people use when they finally talk about things like this. I think I just needed proof. I needed something real and solid that told me the things I was seeing were actually happening. That I wasn't imagining the difference in the way she looked at Amber and the way she looked at me. So I started writing things down in a spiral notebook I kept under my mattress. Dates, events, what was said, what was not said. The notebook filled up faster than I expected. By the time I graduated high school, I had 3 of them. I got into the University of Tennessee's architecture program on a partial scholarship. I had worked every dollar of the other half myself, mowing lawns and doing odd jobs since I was 14 years old. My mother came to graduation. She wore sunglasses the whole ceremony and spent most of it texting. Amber wasn't there. She had a volleyball tournament. My grandfather Raymond came. He drove 90 minutes from Clarksville to Knoxville and sat in the 3rd row in his good button-up shirt and his one good tie. And when I walked across that stage and looked out into the crowd, he was the only person standing before they even called my name. He was on his feet early, before the applause started, before anyone else moved, and he held one fist up over his head like I had done something that had been a long time coming. Because to him, I had. I graduated in 2015 and got a job with a structural engineering firm in Nashville. I worked hard. I got promoted twice in 3 years. I saved carefully. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Germantown, cooked my own food, paid my own bills, and never asked anyone for a single thing. And I kept adding to the records. The notebooks became a digital folder on my laptop. Documents, screenshots, dates, emails. 14 years of watching the same pattern repeat itself in 100 different small ways. I was not dramatic about it. I was thorough. That's what engineers do. We don't guess at what's holding something up. We document it. In the spring of 2020, Raymond called me on a Tuesday night while I was making dinner. He said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen and not say a word until I'm finished." I turned the stove off. I sat down at my kitchen table. He told me he had rewritten his will. He told me he had made a decision, and he had been thinking about it for a long time, and he was leaving the house on Elm Ridge Road, the house he built with his own hands in 1971. To me. Not to my mother, not to my aunt, not to Amber. To me. He said he had 3 reasons and he wanted me to hear all 3. First, he said, I was the only person who came to his house to take care of it, not to be taken care of. Second, he said I was the one who understood buildings the way he did, and he wanted the house to go to someone who would respect what went into it. Third, he said, and he stopped here for a long moment, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. He said he had watched my whole childhood, and he wanted the last thing he ever did for me to be something that couldn't be undone. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after we hung up. I cried a little. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Not because of the house, because of that third reason, because of the word undone. Raymond Webb died on March 14, 2021. He died quietly, in the bedroom where he had slept for 50 years, in the house he had built by hand. My father called me at 6 a.m, and I drove the 45 miles to Clarksville without stopping. And when I pulled up to Elm Ridge Road, my mother was already on the porch on her phone. She didn't look up when I walked past her. The will was read 3 weeks later. My mother was there. My Aunt Linda was there. I was there. When the attorney read the part about the house, my mother made a sound I had never heard her make before. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of something that has been true for a long time, suddenly becoming real. She turned and looked at me. I did not look away. She did not speak to me for 4 months. And in those 4 months, while I quietly began the process of legally transferring the deed into my name, she was not sitting still. She was making phone calls. She was telling people things. She was building a story about what I had done and why the house was rightfully hers and why I couldn't be trusted. What she didn't know yet was that her own sister had been writing every single word down. And that folder on my laptop, 14 years deep, was about to become something a lot more powerful than a diary. If you're just finding this story, go back and watch part 1 first. Because what I'm about to tell you only hits the way it's supposed to hit if you know where it started. For everyone who's been waiting, here's part 2. When I say my mother was making phone calls, I don't mean she called 1 or 2 people and vented. I mean she ran a campaign. A deliberate, organised 4-month campaign to reshape the story of what Raymond Webb had done with his own house, before anyone outside our family had time to form an opinion on their own. She called my Aunt Linda first. Linda was Raymond's other daughter, 5 years younger than my mother, and the two of them had never been particularly warm toward each other. My mother told Linda that Raymond had not been of sound mind when he rewrote the will. She said I'd been filling his head with things during my visits. She used the phrase undue influence, which told me she had already spoken to an attorney before she even called Linda, because that is a legal term, and my mother did not pick it up off the street. Linda called me the same evening. She said, "Your mother just told me Raymond wasn't competent when he changed his will." I said, "Raymond's doctor evaluated him 2 months before he rewrote it. His attorney required it specifically because contested wills are common. Raymond passed with flying colours." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I figured it was something like that." Another pause. "She's going to call everyone, Marcus. I want you to know that." She was right. My mother called cousins. She called family friends. She called the pastor of the Baptist church, where Raymond had been a member for 40 years. She called her Wednesday lunch group. She called Renata her closest friend since college. She told each of them a slightly different version of the same story. That I had manipulated a dying old man. That the house was a family treasure being stolen by someone who had never truly been part of the family to begin with. She used those words, never truly been part of the family. She'd been saying some version of that sentence my entire life. But this was the first time she was saying it to other people out loud, in the context of something real, with legal consequences attached. What she did not know was that Linda was writing everything down. I don't know exactly when Linda decided to start documenting the calls. She told me later that it was during the 3rd phone call, when my mother started changing details she had already stated in the first 2. Linda said something shifted in her when she noticed the inconsistencies. She said she got up from the couch, got a yellow legal pad from the drawer in her kitchen, and started writing while my mother was still talking. She did this for 4 months, 12 pages, single-spaced, dated and time-stamped. She mailed them to me in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a sticky note that said only, "Keep these safe." I added them to the folder. In the meantime, I hired an estate attorney named Patricia Moss out of Nashville. Patricia was a small woman with a silver bob and the kind of calm that comes from spending 20 years in courtrooms, watching people make avoidable mistakes. She transferred the deed properly and legally into my name. She paid close attention to every document I handed her. When I gave her the folder, all of it, the digital records going back 14 years, Linda's 12 pages, Everything. She looked up at me over her reading glasses and said, "How long have you been keeping all of this?" "Since I was 16, I said. She looked back down at the folder. "Good," she said quietly. That was all. My mother's will contest was filed in the summer of 2021 and dismissed by the court that fall. The judge reviewed Raymond's medical evaluation, the attorney's documentation, the clear and unambiguous language of the will itself, and found nothing to contest. There was no confusion, no coercion, no undue influence. There was just a man who knew exactly what he wanted to do with something he had built and had done it. My mother called me the evening after the dismissal. Her voice was very controlled. The kind of control that takes effort to maintain. She said, "You will regret this, Marcus." I said, "I know you believe that." She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I opened the folder and added the date and a single line. Will contest dismissed. Phone call received 6:47 p.m. I kept adding entries. For the next year, things were relatively quiet on the surface. I left my father in the house because he had nowhere else to go, and because he was 60 years old and had spent 4 decades being ground down quietly in a marriage that didn't value him. And I was not going to punish him for that. I paid the property taxes. I paid for repairs. I drove up from Nashville every few weeks to check on things and to sit with my father on Raymond's porch and drink coffee and talk about nothing in particular. My mother, during this time, had essentially moved herself into the master bedroom and begun operating as though the house was still hers. She redecorated. She replaced fixtures. She had a friend come and paint the living room a colour Raymond would have hated. She sent me a bill for the plumber after she replaced the kitchen faucet. An invoice, formal and itemised, as though I were her landlord and she was simply a tenant reporting a maintenance issue. I paid the invoice. I photographed it first. I added it to the folder. And then in the summer of 2022, Amber moved back in. I heard about it from my father in one of our quiet porch conversations. He said it carefully, the way he always said things he knew I wouldn't want to hear. "Your sister's moving her things in this weekend," he said, "the room at the end of the hall." I nodded. I didn't say anything for a while. "Did anyone ask me?" I said finally. My father looked at his coffee mug. "No," he said. "No one asked." That December, my mother called and said she wanted Christmas to be normal. She used the word normal 3 times in 4 minutes. She said she wanted me to come to the house for Christmas dinner, and she wanted us all to be a family. I drove to Clarksville on Christmas Eve. I should have known something was off the moment I turned onto Elm Ridge Road. There were cars I didn't recognise lining the driveway and the street in front of the house. Through the front window I could see movement, many more people than a quiet family dinner. I knocked on the front door of my own house. Amber opened it. She was dressed up, holding a glass of wine, and behind her I could see approximately 30 people arranged through the living room and into the dining room. Extended family. My mother's church friends. Her Wednesday lunch group. Renata. People I hadn't seen in years, gathered in my grandfather's house for a party I had not been told was happening. My mother appeared at Amber's shoulder. She was wearing the careful public smile she reserved for occasions where she needed to look gracious. "Marcus," she said, "I didn't think you'd actually come." I filed that sentence away immediately. Not, "I'm glad you came." Not, "We've been waiting for you." I didn't think you'd actually come. As if my arriving was a surprise. As if I had not been specifically invited. As if my presence in my own house on Christmas Eve was unexpected. I went inside. I ate dinner. I was polite to everyone. I spoke to my father. I watched Amber open gifts in the living room, while my mother narrated each one like a television host, and the room laughed and applauded on cue. Near the end of the night, I stepped into the kitchen for a glass of water and heard my mother talking to Renata near the back counter. They were not being quiet. My mother was saying that Amber was going to be living in the house full-time starting in January, and that she had big plans, and that she was thinking of converting the second bedroom into a craft room and the garage into a proper sitting space. Renata said, "Is Marcus okay with all that?" And my mother said, clearly without lowering her voice at all, "Marcus doesn't really have a say. This has always been our family home. He just has the paper." I was standing in the kitchen doorway. My mother saw me. She did not stop smiling. I drove back to Nashville that night in the dark. I sat in my apartment and I opened the folder and I made a list. Not of grievances, not of emotions. A structural list, the kind I made at work. What was load-bearing? What was cosmetic? What was the actual problem underneath the surface problem? The actual problem was simple. My mother did not believe that paper meant anything. She had spent her whole life in rooms where words and relationships and the right kind of smile meant more than documentation. She had spent her whole life being the woman who controlled the social architecture of every room she walked into. She had spent my entire childhood making me understand, in 100 small ways, that belonging was something she granted or withheld, and that I had never fully received it. She thought that was still the world we were living in. She did not understand that I had been building a different kind of structure for 14 years. Quiet, thorough, documented, load-bearing. In June of 2023, I got the phone call from my father that changed everything. He was in the driveway, speaking quietly the way he always spoke when he was telling me something he knew he should have said sooner. "Marcus," he said, "your mother had a locksmith come today." I was quiet. She changed the front door lock, the back door lock too. A pause. "I have a new key. Amber has a new key." I waited. "She didn't give you one," he said. The words landed slowly, the way heavy things fall. I said, "Did she say why?" My father was quiet for a long time, long enough that I could hear traffic somewhere behind him, long enough that I understood he was choosing his words the way he always chose his words. Carefully, too carefully, in a way that had cost us both a great deal over the years. "She said it was her house," he said finally, "and she'd decide who had a key." I thanked him for calling. I hung up. I sat very still at my desk for about 2 minutes. Then I called Patricia Moss. Patricia picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened. Her response was immediate and completely calm. She said, "Marcus, she just handed us everything we need. She told me to drive to Clarksville that weekend and photograph the new locks. She told me to make no noise, no confrontation, nothing dramatic. She said to document it the way I documented everything else, and then come back and let her handle what came next." I drove to Clarksville that Saturday morning. It was raining. Not hard. The soft, steady kind that soaks you slowly without warning. I pulled up to Elm Ridge Road and parked at the curb. I walked up the porch steps of my grandfather's house. I knocked on the front door. My mother opened it. She looked at me with an expression I'd seen on her face exactly once before. The day the will was read. That same look. Something between satisfaction and patience. Like a woman who had been waiting for a scene she choreographed herself. "You need to leave," she said. "This is my house," I said. "This has always been our family home, Marcus." She said always the way people say words they have rehearsed. You don't live here, you don't belong here, you never really did. I looked past her for just a moment. I could see the living room, Raymond's rocking chair, the photographs on the walls he had hung with his own hands, the house he had built in 1971 out of concrete and wood and intention, left to me specifically because of the word undone. Okay, I said. I stepped off the porch. I walked back through the rain to my car. I photographed the lock on the front door and the lock on the back before I left. I drove to the end of Elm Ridge Road and sat in a gas station parking lot and added 3 lines to the folder on my phone. Lock changed without notice. Photographed both doors. Patricia Moss notified. Then I started my car. I drove back to Nashville. I made dinner. I went to sleep. The hearing was scheduled for February 14th, 2024. I want you to think about that for a second. Valentine's Day. The day people talk about love and who they belong to. That was the day a judge was going to decide who this house belonged to. And what happened in that courtroom? What my mother did not see coming. What 14 years of quiet documentation had been building toward. If you're just finding this story, go back and watch parts 1 and 2 first. Because what happens in this part only lands the way it's supposed to if you've walked the whole road with me. For everyone who stayed, this is the part you've been waiting for. The Clarksville Courthouse is a limestone building in the middle of downtown. It has wide front steps and tall windows, and the kind of quiet authority that old public buildings carry without trying. I had driven past it 100 times growing up without ever thinking I would walk inside it for something with my own name on the paperwork. I arrived at 8:30 in the morning on February 14th, 2024, in a grey suit I'd pressed the night before at the Holiday Inn on the highway where I'd stayed. I had eaten room service pasta. I had watched a documentary about suspension bridges. I had slept better than I expected, which surprised me and then didn't, because I'd been preparing for this for a long time. And there is a particular kind of calm that comes when you have done everything you can do, and the only thing left is to show up. Patricia Moss was already on the courthouse steps when I arrived. Silver bob, dark coat, a leather bag over one shoulder that contained, among other things, 14 years of my life, organised into a format that a judge could read in 2.5 hours. She looked at me when I walked up. She said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Ready." She nodded once. "Good. Stay quiet in there unless I tell you otherwise. Let the documents do the talking." That was the most important thing anyone said to me that entire day. My mother arrived 20 minutes later with Amber and her attorney, a man in an expensive suit who walked like someone accustomed to winning. Amber was wearing a black dress and kept her eyes on the floor. My mother walked in like she owned the building, the same way she had walked into every room my entire life. Straight spine, chin up, the white blazer she wore to every occasion that required her to project authority. She found me across the lobby immediately. She held my gaze for a moment. I held it back. Then I looked away. Not because she made me look away, but because I had nothing to say to her with my eyes that wasn't already in Patricia's leather bag. The courtroom was smaller than the ones on television. Wood panelling, fluorescent lighting, 6 rows of benches behind the bar. The judge's bench was elevated slightly, and behind it at 8:59, the Honourable Diane Strickland walked in and sat down. Judge Strickland was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the expression of someone who had been doing this job for 19 years, and intended to do it 19 more. She did not look like she was impressed by expensive suits. She did not look like she was impressed by anything in particular. She looked like a woman whose only interest was the documents in front of her. That was the best thing I could have hoped for. Patricia presented our case first. She laid it out the way I had watched her prepare it, methodically, without drama, in chronological order. The deed transferred legally and properly after Raymond Webb's death in 2021. The medical evaluation Raymond had undergone 2 months before rewriting his will, conducted at the request of his own attorney as standard practice. The notarized statements from Gerald Pruitt confirming Raymond's full mental competency at the time of the revision. The documentation of my mother's occupancy following the transfer, the unauthorized repainting of 2 rooms, the plumber invoice sent to me as if I were a maintenance department, the installation of new locks in June of 2023 without notice or consent from the legal owner. And then Patricia placed Linda's 12 pages on the table. She did not read all of them aloud. She summarized. She told Judge Strickland that the legal owner had documented, over a 4-month period following Raymond Webb's death, a consistent pattern of statements made by the occupant to family members, neighbours, and community contacts, statements that demonstrated full awareness that the property had been legally transferred and a deliberate effort to socially undermine that transfer through coordinated misrepresentation. My mother's attorney objected to the characterization. Judge Strickland looked at him over her reading glasses. She said, "I'll read the pages myself, counsellor." She read them, all 12. The courtroom was quiet for about 6 minutes while she did. I sat with my hands flat on the table in front of me, and I watched her eyes move across the paper, and I thought about a 16-year-old boy in a school library reading books 2 grades above him and keeping a spiral notebook under his mattress because he needed proof that the things he was seeing were real. I thought about the word undone. When Judge Strickland set the pages down, she looked at my mother's attorney and said, "Your argument." His argument was the one they had been building for months. Familial occupancy, decades of residency. The house as a family home, rather than an individual asset. The idea that Raymond Webb's intentions should be interpreted in the context of family continuity rather than strict legal transfer. It was a reasonable sounding argument. It was the kind of argument that works when the documentation on the other side is thin. The documentation on the other side was not thin. Patricia responded for 11 minutes. She was precise and thorough, and completely without emotion. Which was exactly right because the emotion was in the documents themselves. She did not need to add any. When she finished, Judge Strickland removed her reading glasses from her nose and set them on the bench. She looked at the papers in front of her for a moment. Then she looked up at the room. She said the deed was clear. She said the transfer had been executed properly and legally. She said the occupancy was unlawful. And she said she was granting a 60-day vacate order, effective immediately. My mother said, "That house has been in this family for 50 years. Judge Strickland looked at her directly. Her voice did not change in volume or temperature. She said, "The family member who built it chose who it went to, ma'am. That decision was his to make." The room was quiet. My mother's attorney put a hand on her arm. Amber in the row behind them put her face in her hands. She was not crying for me. I understood that. I did not hold it against her. She was crying for the version of her life that had just been officially rearranged. I stood up when Patricia touched my elbow. We walked out of the courtroom together into the hallway, and Patricia shook my hand and said, 14 years of documentation. That's what won this. She paused. That and Raymond Webb, choosing his attorney wisely. I thanked her. I meant it completely. I walked down the courthouse steps into the February cold, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the limestone building and the grey Tennessee sky above it. I did not feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly because I think people expect this moment to feel like a victory in the loud fist-pumping sense. It did not feel like that. It felt like the moment after you have finished shoring up a foundation that has been compromised for a long time. Not exciting. Not loud, just solid. Finally, completely irreversibly solid. My father called me that afternoon. He'd not been at the courthouse. He said he could not bring himself to sit in a room and watch his family come apart in front of a judge. And I understood that, even though a smaller and more tired part of me wished just once he had shown up somewhere when it cost him something. His voice on the phone was rough in the way voices get when a person has been sitting alone with something heavy all day. He said, "I should have given you a key." I waited. "A long time ago," he said. "A different kind of key." I understood what he meant. He wasn't talking about the lock on the front door. He was talking about 30 years of choosing the path of least resistance in a house where one person held all the keys and the rest of them went along with it. I told him I knew that. He asked if he could stay in his room while he figured things out. I said yes without hesitating. My father was 61 years old. He had spent 4 decades being quietly diminished in a marriage where his role was to stay out of the way of someone else's story. He deserved a room in that house for as long as he needed it. My mother and Amber moved out in late March. They moved into an apartment together across town. My mother told people in Clarksville that I had stolen the house through legal manipulation. She said it to the Wednesday lunch group. She said it to Renata. She said it at church. Some of those people had known Raymond Webb personally. Some of them had been in that house on Elm Ridge Road for cookouts and holiday dinners over 40 years. Some of them had watched who showed up to take care of Raymond in the last years of his life, and who called occasionally from a distance. The story my mother was telling had a lot of empty spaces where those people's own memories were sitting. And people, when given a story that contradicts their own memory, will usually trust their memory. I moved into the house in April. I took 3 weeks off work, the most consecutive vacation days I had taken in my entire career. And I used them the way my grandfather would have used them. I worked with my hands. I fixed the foundation settling I'd been watching for 3 years. An issue in the crawl space that would have become serious in another winter or 2. I replaced the gutters on the north side. I fixed the bathroom floor that had been soft since the winter before Raymond died. I repainted 2 rooms back to the colours Raymond had chosen in 1987, which I found written in his handwriting on the back of a paint receipt I discovered folded inside the drawer of his workbench in the garage. He had kept the receipt for 34 years. That is the kind of man he was. The first night I slept in that house, in Raymond's bedroom, in the bed he had slept in for 50 years, I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling he had drywalled with his own hands in 1971, and I thought about everything that had been necessary to get me to this specific moment in this specific room. I thought about a 16-year-old boy with a spiral notebook under his mattress. I thought about a drafting class that cost $80. I thought about a tire swing and a man in his good shirt standing up before anyone else in a graduation crowd. I thought about the word undone. I fell asleep listening to the sound the old house makes at night. The settling sounds, the wood breathing, the small shifts and adjustments of a structure that has been standing for 50 years and intends to stand 50 more. To anyone else, it might have sounded like an old house creaking. To me, it sounded like the building was exhaling. In September of last year, I got a message from Amber. It was short. She said she knew she hadn't done right by me. She said she thought she had known it even when it was happening, and she'd been too selfish to do anything about it. She said she was sorry, and she didn't expect me to respond. I read it 3 times. I typed back 2 sentences. Thank you for saying it. Give me some time. I have thought about Amber a lot since then. She grew up in the same house I did, raised to believe she was precious, and I was optional. That is not entirely her fault. She was also a child once, shaped by the same woman, taught the same lesson about who in our family mattered and who was background. The difference between us was not that she was loved and I wasn't. The difference was that she was taught to accept what she was given without question, and I was given so little that I had no choice but to build something myself. We were both shaped by the same absence, we just didn't know it the same way. My father comes to the house on Sunday afternoons now. He drives over from the apartment he rented in March, a small place near the old part of downtown, and he sits in Raymond's rocking chair on the porch, and we drink coffee, and sometimes we talk and sometimes we just sit in the quiet. He has started saying things he held in for 30 years. He says them slowly, carefully, like a man learning a language he should have been taught as a child. He is not good at it yet. He is trying. I let him try. In October, Tate, my mother's brother, my uncle, a man I had not had a real conversation with in 15 years, called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday night. He said he had heard what happened. He said he had known for a long time that things in our family were not right. He said he was sorry he had never said it when it would have counted more. I said, "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because your mother is the kind of person who makes the cost of disagreeing very high. And I chose the cheaper option for a long time." That was the most honest thing anyone in my extended family had ever said to me directly. I told him I appreciated the call. I told him he could call again. There is a photograph on the wall just inside the front door of the house on Elm Ridge Road. Raymond took it himself with a timer in the summer of 1999. It shows him standing on this porch with his arm around a 6-year-old boy, squinting into the afternoon sun, with both hands shoved into the pockets of his shorts. You can see the tire swing in the background. You can see the light coming off the sycamores the way it only comes off sycamores in a Tennessee summer. Raymond kept that photograph on his wall for 22 years. He never moved it, never replaced it with anything. It was in the exact spot he put it in 1999, and it was the first thing you saw when you walked through the front door. I left it exactly where he put it. Some things are built to last. Some things are built to last, and they do. You just have to wait long enough and document carefully enough and trust that the structure will eventually show everyone what it was holding all along. My mother sent me a text message last month. 3 words. "Can we talk?" I read it. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table. I looked out the window at the backyard where the tire swing still hangs from the oak tree Raymond planted in 1974. It is 50 years old now, that tree. The rope is newer. I replaced it last spring. But the branch is the original, thick and steady. The kind of branch that was growing toward this specific purpose for decades before anyone tied anything to it. I have not responded to the text. I have not deleted it either. I am still here, in the house that was built for me before I was born, on the road where I learned what it costs to be invisible, in the room where a man who loved me the right way finally did something about it. The picture belongs to me now, and for the first time in 31 years, so does the house. If this story reached you tonight, If you have ever been the one who was handed less and expected to be grateful for it, type one word in the comments. Just one word. Type undone. That word is yours. It always was.